at this moment in time, okay, you're under arrest on suspicion of breach of a serious crime prevention order. Okay, so you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, something which you later rely in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence, alright? The grounds for this arrest are, since you're released from prison...
It was a cold morning in the south of England, the fog still covering the bare trees. On the driveway of an old manor house, a silver car had been parked there all night. Silent, no one had entered or exited it, no license plate, and no sign that the owner was still around. The police were called by an anonymous phone call. A deep male voice saying exactly 7 words. "You should check that car." Inside, there was no body, no blood, no screams or signs of a murder. But there was something else. An old black notebook hidden behind the driver's seat, some coded notes, and an old map of the Netherlands, yellowed by the years. To ordinary people, these were just some harmless old things. But to the police, it was a warning bell. Because there is only one name in British criminal history that is associated with that kind of map. A name that disappeared from radar for more than 20 years, once keeping the European intelligence network on edge. And now no one is sure whether he has returned or never left. Curtis Warren was born on a winter day in 1963 in Toxteth, a grimy working-class area of South Liverpool where red brick walls and rubbish-strewn alleyways were a common sight. His father was a dock worker, often returning home with bleeding hands and a back bent under heavy sacks. His mother, a black woman of Trinidadian descent, worked quietly for wealthy families, scrubbing floors, washing clothes, sometimes going hungry to feed her children. They had little, no books, no expectations, just long, cold evenings and stories about the neighbor who had been arrested for petty theft or stabbed behind the pub. In that atmosphere, crime was not a surprise. It was almost part of the landscape, like rotten bricks or broken windows. But Curtis was different. He didn't just learn to survive, he watched, listened, and remembered. At 15, he dropped out of school. At 17, he knew how to pick a car in 30 seconds. He didn't smoke or drink, but he knew who was selling, who was delivering, and who would betray him to the police. While his friends were roaming around looking for free meals, Warren was planning to control their routes. Not because he was poor, but because he hated feeling passive. From the beginning, Curtis didn't want to be part of the system. He wanted to control it. Curtis Warren began his career in the underworld not with multi-million-dollar drug deals, but with nights spent as a bouncer in downtown Liverpool nightclubs, where the thumping music masked the screech of knives and the menacing glares that greeted every drink. There he learned 2 things. Power comes from control, and loyalty only lasts as long as the money keeps flowing. In the shadows of the deals behind bathroom doors, Warren was more than just a keep the socks. He observed, approached, and gradually built his own network. In the early 1990s, when British gangs relied on European middlemen for their supplies, Warren did the unthinkable. He flew directly to Colombia and connected with the notorious Cali cartel. He knew that if he controlled the source of the drugs, he controlled the game. No one in Britain was as reckless, and no one as cold. He made no threats, no bravado. A look was all it took to make his opponents flinch. The underworld called him cocky, the fearless, arrogant one. But the price of power was blood and betrayal. As his network expanded across Europe, the links began to fray. A shipment went missing. A henchman disappeared. Warnings were sent, but no one knew from whom. And then, for the first time, Warren realized, to keep his empire, he had to prepare for the inevitable. A war in the shadows he once controlled. It was November 1996, a misty morning in the quiet Dutch suburb of Sassenheim, where luxury villas were scattered among maple trees in the last days of autumn. But that morning, the peace was shattered. Armed Dutch police, in cooperation with Interpol, surrounded a large villa with high walls and automatic iron gates. They didn't shoot or break down the door. They just approached, then stormed in with lightning speed. Inside, they found Warren sitting there, drinking coffee, wearing a turtleneck, and looking unfazed. On the table, in addition to his steaming cup of coffee, was a stack of encrypted documents, a map of Europe circled in red, and a long list of names handwritten in dark blue ink. In the bedroom, there was a safe filled with cash, euro, pound, Swiss franc, and a Glock pistol, clean and fingerprint-free. But what stunned the police most was the basement behind the villa, where more than 1,000 kilograms of pure cocaine, worth more than 125 million pounds, was stored. And that was not all. Another warehouse in Rotterdam, less than 50 miles away, was preparing to ship a second shipment. If they were a few days later, all the evidence would evaporate like morning mist. Warren did not resist, saying nothing more than, "I guess breakfast was delayed." His tone was calm, as if he were greeting an old friend, not an armed task force. Prosecuting him would not be easy. All transactions were encrypted, and none of his henchmen dared to talk. But the Dutch police were patient. They traced the tracks from utility bills, ATM cameras, to the amount of petrol bought at a nearby station. And the puzzle began to come together. During the months-long trial, prosecutors reconstructed an international trafficking network, with Warren at its center. Not the ringleader, but the one who set the rules. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison for drug trafficking and possession, a sentence considered too lenient for the scale of the operation. But Warren did not weaken in prison. On the contrary, he became even more fearsome. He remained as imposing and cool as he had been in the New Vossenveld prison, the most heavily guarded in the Netherlands. In 1999, a fight broke out in the common area. A Turkish prisoner, who was believed to have provoked him, was lying motionless on the floor. When questioned, Warren said only one thing: "I gave him a chance to back down." An autopsy found that the victim died from a traumatic brain injury, and Curtis Warren was sentenced to an additional 4 years in prison for manslaughter. No one in the camp dared to confront him from then on. By this time, people began to realize that Warren was more than just a clever criminal. He was a shadow strategist, knowing when to act and when to wait. In a world where the law was the light, Warren lived comfortably in the gray area and without worry. The investigation did not end with Curtis Warren's arrest. On the contrary, it was just the beginning of a journey to discover what investigators called the stealth empire, a system that operated almost perfectly, without papers, without names, without traces. From the documents seized in the villa in Sassenheim, the Dutch police expanded the investigation to related links. Underground money transfers from Rotterdam, small warehouses in Valencia, Spain, and especially anonymous accounts on the island of Jersey, where the banking system is considered the perfect screen for dirty money. Every little detail led to a big thing. Warren did not operate alone. He was the center of a transnational network where each individual played a clear and important role. He used encrypted phones, communication software that only worked for a few minutes and then deleted itself. Meetings were rarely in person. Even the delivery men didn't know each other. They followed instructions sent by text message only once and kept absolutely nothing but cash. The source? Directly from the Cali cartel, Colombia's notorious drug cartel, an unofficial but powerful partner. Rumor had it that an Albanian gang had tried to cut into Warren's route in Spain. Less than a week later, the leader of that gang had disappeared without a trace. A short note was left in his apartment: "Don't touch Cocky's line." The organization's structure was no different from a corporation's. The drivers handled the logistics. The liaisons were responsible for delivering messages on time. The inspectors only checked the correct quantity, never asked where it came from. And finally, the cleaners, who cleaned up when things went wrong, perhaps deleting data or silencing those who knew too much. When the police caught up with some of their underlings, almost all of them kept absolutely silent. No one asked for a reduced sentence. No one cooperated. Some were held in solitary confinement for years without speaking. It was the clearest sign yet. Warren didn't just inspire fear, he inspired loyalty through trust and obsession. During hundreds of hours of interrogation, no one dared to mention his name directly. They called him by many names: the Watcher, Bossman, or simply C. But there was something quiet and fearful in their eyes. Even when talking about a shipment, a meeting, as if speaking out could cost them their lives. And what worried investigators most was not the drugs that had crossed the border, but the number of people who still believed Curtis Warren was untouchable. In 2007, After nearly a decade behind bars in one of Europe's highest security prisons, Curtis "Cocky" Warren walked out. There was no cheering, no one was waiting, but the media was waiting. They wanted to know, was Britain's most notorious drug lord really washing his hands of the crime, or was he simply preparing for a spectacular comeback? Warren answered no questions. He walked straight, silent and composed. But the silence lasted less than 6 months. In September 2007, the police in Jersey, a small island under separate jurisdiction between England and France, received information about a major cannabis trafficking ring linked to the name Curtis. Through coded conversations, secret coffee shop meetings, and a series of cash transactions through middlemen, they weaved a new smuggling network, more sophisticated, more discreet, but with a familiar style. No one is on the hook, no one holds the goods, no one speaks. And in the middle of it all, there was Warren. When the police swooped in to arrest him,
At this moment in time, okay, you're under arrest on suspicion of breach of a serious crime prevention order. Okay, so you do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, something which you later rely in court. Anything you do say may be given evidence, alright? The grounds for this arrest are, since you're released from prison back in the last year, you've been subject to a serious crime prevention order, which obviously has certain restrictions and stuff like that on you. Obviously, as part of that National Crime Agency investigation, we've identified that you've breached that order on a number of occasions, alright? So, this arrest is necessary for a proper and effective investigation, and obviously prevent the loss and damage of evidence, alright?
Warren didn't resist. He even smiled. The demeanor of a man who was used to the game. The Jersey trial attracted attention across Britain. Prosecutors accused Warren of being the mastermind of a plot to smuggle more than £1 million worth of cannabis into Jersey, a trade that, if successful, would be laundered through fake businesses before being repatriated as legitimate income. Warren, as usual, pleaded not guilty, but the evidence this time was enough to convict. Matching voice recordings, a distribution plan found on a USB drive hidden in the car, and the testimony of a debt-ridden underling. The result, 13 years in prison. It seemed like the end of it. But in 2013, the case took a surprising turn. The High Court ordered the forfeiture of £198 million, the amount Warren had allegedly earned from drug dealing throughout his career. It was one of the largest confiscation orders in British criminal history. The court made it clear, if Warren could not prove the legitimate source of the money, he would receive an additional 10 years in prison. And in a familiar move, he refused to pay. No negotiations, no compromise, just silence, and continued to serve time. Warren was finally released in November 2022, after nearly 14 years of continuous incarceration. At 59, many assumed his prime was over. But even after all these years, the shadow of Cocky still looms over the news. The security services placed him on a special watch list and imposed a serious crime prevention order, a rare measure that restricts his finances, movements, communications, and even requires him to report his electronic devices. But just a few months later, in 2024, Warren was back in court. This time it was not for drugs, but for breaching the order, being caught using an unregistered phone and meeting an individual who had been on the investigation list. Once again, in a small way, he had crossed the line. The court sentenced him to 14 months probation, a public warning that Cocky Warren, even in his old age, was still a threat. To many, he was the embodiment of a cold, quiet era of crime, where power lay not in violence, but in silence. As for the police, Curtis Warren is still a name that cannot be crossed off the blacklist, whether he is at large or simply waiting for the next opportunity. At 60, Curtis Warren is no longer the young man who once shook hands with police and cartels alike. He no longer holds clandestine meetings across continents, no longer hides his goods behind shipments of bananas or coffee from South America. He now lives quietly in an untraceable location. No employment records, no financial activity, and not a single interview since his release. But one thing has remained constant. His name is still on the watch lists of many European intelligence agencies, still the subject of whispers in darkened interrogation rooms. What is frightening is not what he did. It is how he has survived for more than 3 decades, in a world where nearly every kingpin has been captured, betrayed, or killed. He has never been shot. He has never lost control. And he has never let anyone really see the whole story of his journey. Has he really gone out of business? Or is he just waiting for another time to resurface with a new name, a new network, and an even bigger game? What do you think has kept Curtis "Cocky" Warren alive in the underworld for so long? Comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss out on more true cases. Stories that seem like movies, but are all drawn from real-life files.